Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Edge of Tomorrow. Episode 7. Chapter 54. Why aren't you wearing any pants, doll? Alec's breath fanned my ear, words caught in my throat, my face heating though I couldn't bring myself to pull away from his touch. His breath hitched as I shifted. His desire coupled with my own, sweet to the taste and incredibly overwhelming. His desire battered me senseless, heating my skin as though it were a crackling fire hidden within him. I could taste his need to touch me, to claim every part of my body, to taste my skin and feel me shake beneath him. I couldn't think through it all, through both of our emotions running through me. All I could think about were his hands trailing along me. Couldn't sleep, sweetheart. Cade smiled, but the action did nothing to hide the burning in his eyes. I whimpered under the intensity, and felt Alec's grip on me tighten. She's got herself all worked up. Alec grinned slyly against my neck, and I was sure my face had flushed an even brighter shade of red. I have not. I sputtered, though I couldn't deny my body's natural response to the twins. I'm not worked up, and it was Alec's fault. Cade shot his brother an amused glance, then trailed his finger down one of my flaming cheeks. His eyes trailed the blush, that even in the dark, Cade could see. I suppressed the urge to shiver as his fingers danced along my arm, running down the scratchy fabric of the t-shirt to where my legs were. Amusement laced with his burning desire right where the shorts would have been. No pants? Cade quipped, his eyebrow raised. I could tell through their whirlwind of emotions, neither one was upset over my lack of pants. I know. Alec chuckled, we can help you sleep, sweetheart. Cade murmured, his eyes dark and pupils blown with desire. My entire body stiffened as Cade lifted himself from the bed, situating himself between my clenched legs. Even in the dark, I could see his eyes roaming my face, devouring my surprise and sheer inexperience. Cade's hands were rough against the softness, and I couldn't fight as he spread my legs apart, pushing the t-shirt up until it sat just above my belly button. So beautiful. Alec murmured against my ear, his fingers dancing along my exposed stomach. Will you let me taste you, mate? Cade asked, his calm voice did nothing to suppress the wave of hunger that emanated from him. My voice refused to come, my L.P.S. unable to form words under the overwhelming attention of the twins. Their gentle touches ignited a fire low in my stomach, spreading along my skin in searing waves. My legs parted on their own, and I shivered as Cade's hungry eyes roamed my most sensitive area. Guilt formed within me as I felt the twins' desire rise. I wanted to help them, to touch them the way they touched me, but I wasn't sure where to begin. I had never initiated something like this, and if I were being honest, the twins still made me feel nervous and inexperienced. I met Cade's eyes. I could feel him tense under my touch, a low growl escaping as I ran my finger along the waistband of his shorts. My eyes snapped up to meet Cade's as his hand closed around my wrist, stopping me from wandering any further. Tonight was about you, sweetheart. Cade smirked, his voice turning into a low, husky whisper. When I let you touch me there, I might not be able to stop. Alec chuckled against my neck as I pouted, but my eyes were already beginning to flutter closed. I felt Alec's gentle hand guiding me as I turned to my side, and drifted down to pull the t-shirt over my bottom. Go to sleep, doll, Alec whispered against my ear, planting light kisses along my neck. With my head against Cade's warm che.st, and my back pressed against Alec, my eyes fluttered shut before I could think of anything else. With their arms wrapped around me, I fell into the most peaceful sleep I've had in years, nothing else but the thought of my mates on my mind. Chapter 55. Alec and Cade both accompanied me to Garrett's house the next day. When one had to leave, the other would keep an eye on me. Neither wanted me out of their sight with everything that was going on. There were still 2 more rogues who knew what I was, that I was a white wolf. I had all morning to brace myself for what I might face at Garrett's house, and the inevitable conversation I would endure. "How would you feel about meeting our betas after we grab your stuff?" Alec asked from the back seat, leaning forward to flash me a dazzling smile. "Betas?" I asked. I knew enough about wolves and their ranking to know that a beta was second in command, though I was surprised they had 2. 2 alphas, 2 betas. Cade shrugged, giving my hand a gentle squeeze as he drove down the road. Though the strange bond that let me taste Alec and Cade's emotions, I could tell Alec was excited about the prospect of me meeting their betas. Perhaps it was because that meant I was one step closer to becoming their Luna, or because I was finally willing to step into their world. "Oh, sure." I nodded, "I wouldn't mind. They'll be your second in command someday too." Alec smiled, a strand of his dark hair falling down his forehead. "When would that be?" I asked. "I mean, I accept you 2 as my mates, but when would I actually become Luna?" "There will be a ceremony. Nothing too crazy, but Mom and Dad will definitely make a big deal out of it." Alec chuckled, his raspy laugh sent a chill down my spine. "You'll cut your palm, and Cade and I will do the same. Once our blood mixes, you'll officially be brought into the pack and will know the insufferable joy of the mind link." "Mind link?" I asked, my eyes flickering between the 2 of them as I registered the irritation in his voice. "Everyone in our pack has a direct line to our thoughts." Cade explained, "It's like having a cell phone in your head, one you can never silence or shut off." "Oh." I trailed off, my stomach twisting at the thought of an entire pack relying on me. "That sounds interesting." "It's not as bad as it sounds." Alec chuckled, "It can be rather annoying, but it's a quick way to get in contact with us. Especially useful in emergencies. As our mate, you'd have a direct line to the 2 of us." "Oh, I see." I nodded, "Kind of like how I can feel your emotions." The 2 of them went radio silent, and I grimaced as unease and surprise ran through the 2 of them. Judging from their emotions, this wasn't a normality between mated werewolves. I wanted to laugh at the 2 of them. So, having a direct link between each other's thoughts was normal, but not sensing each other's emotions. "You can feel our emotions?" Alec asked. "How long has this been happening?" "I think it started when I accepted the 2 of you as my mates." I frowned. "Is that not normal?" "Not for normal wolves, no." Cade shook his head. "It could be a factor of her being a white wolf." Alec shrugged, flashing me a wicked grin that filled my head with all sorts of thoughts. His smile was one of promise, one of carnal desire so strong my toes curled. "So, you can feel all of our emotions." The wave of desire that hit me was strong enough to make me flinch. My legs clenched together on their own, and I huffed as Alec let out a deep laugh. "Yes." I cleared my throat, turning my head as the heat rushed to my cheeks. "I can feel them all." "It'll be so much easier to get you all worked up," Cade chuckled. "She's always been easy to get worked up," Alec smirked, "even before she could feel our emotions." "Such a responsive mate," Cade winked, and I groaned under the collective desire that radiated from the 2 of them. "If the 2 of you get me all worked up, I'm not going to Garrett's," I grumbled, giving them both a half-hearted grimace. "Not to worry, D0LL." Alec grinned, "We have all day." I'm beginning to not like this whole white wolf thing. I sighed. Their desire quickly turned to concern, with just a sprinkling of worry. I couldn't pinpoint if they were worried about me, or if they were worried. I'd decide this was too much and leave again. Either way, I flashed the two of them a reassuring smile. As much as I'd like to reassure you, this is only the beginning. Cade shook his head. We don't know much about white wolves, but what we do know is that every time one appears, something big is happening. They're also all extremely powerful. The keepers of magic. Alec chuckled dryly, continuing when I flashed him a confused look. That's what our grandpa used to say, that white wolves were the keepers of magic. I wanted to whine, to claim how I never wanted to be a keeper of magic, but I had changed since I left. Complaining would do nothing to change my situation. Just as many people were born human, I was born a werewolf. There was no changing what and who I was. After accepting my mates and my place in this new world, I could feel how much I was born for this role to be their Luna, their moon, and stars. If keeping Alec and Cade meant accepting this huge destiny, then I would accept with a smile on my face. Do you think you two could dig up some more information on white wolves? I asked, fighting to keep the excitement from my voice. We can definitely try. Alec nodded. We'll have to be careful. The last thing we need is drawing any attention. What am I supposed to do until then? I frowned. Thalia's been itching for another run. We'll figure that out. Cade replied, we'll take you somewhere safe to shift, and one of us will be there at all times. Feeling content with the outcome of our conversation, I watched the trees as they passed us by. A familiar ache settled in my stomach as we pulled into Garrett's driveway. I looked up at the house that had briefly been my home, noting how empty and solemn it felt. Garrett's house felt nothing like Alec and Cade's. It was devoid of all warmth and familiarity. People lived inside the house, but they were not a family. Cade knocked on the front door whilst Alec's hand intertwined in my own. Garrett answered the door, surprise flashing in his eyes before he glared at Alec and Cade. Come inside. Garrett nodded. Hello, Claire. Garrett. I mumbled, giving him a curt nod. I stood in the living room somewhat awkwardly, watching as the three of them glared daggers at one another. The hostility and dislike radiating from Alec and Cade was etched deep, and I wondered what had happened between the three of them. Their hatred for Garrett spanned much farther than him being my father. He had slighted them in some way, and I promised myself I would soon ask. I'll be right back. I placed a gentle hand on Cade's stiff shoulder, smiling as his posture relaxed. He flashed me a small smile, one that twitched at the corners of his P.S. I don't have much stuff. Give me 10 minutes. I trotted upstairs, feeling 3 sets of eyes burning into my back. I found my old bedroom, noting how everything had pretty much remained in place since I had left. The bed was a wreck, as though someone had torn the blankets off in a blind rage, but everything else was in place. I noted how the phone Tori had given me was no longer in the bedroom, and wondered if Alec or Cade had picked it up. I slipped some of the clothes I left behind in a duffel bag the twins had given me, gathering the little odds and ends I left behind. I had brought along all of my most important things when I left, but there were some things I had left behind. Claire! A soft voice called out, making me jump. Caddy stood in the doorway to the bedroom, her eyes flickering down the hall before running over my face. Could we talk for a minute? I shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. Caddy closed the door behind her, and I swallowed as it shut with an audible click. Caddy had been essential to my leaving undetected, and had been quick to help me once she realized my plans. Her eyes were soft, her blonde hair pulled back in a bun. She was nothing like when I first met her. Her eyes lacked their usual burning fire, just as her posture lost its tenseness. "What's up?" I asked awkwardly, clearing my throat as I zipped up the duffel bag. "You came back, for Alec and Cade, right?" Caddy asked, her voice unusually soft. "I did." I nodded slowly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I made a mistake leaving them. Just as I made a mistake helping you leave." Caddy gave me a small smile. "I know I was horrible to you from the beginning, but you have to understand where I was coming from. I had been groomed my entire life to take over the pack, just to have Dad rip it out from under me once he found you. While it didn't excuse the way she treated me, somehow, I understood where she was coming from. Just like me, she had been raised to believe one thing, only to have it taken from her. I knew deep in my heart, that there was no replacement for an Alpha or Luna. You could only be born into the position, not trained or raised to become one." "I do understand." I nodded, pouring strength into my words. "It doesn't excuse how you or your mom acted, but I do understand. Unfortunately, my mom's just a..." Caddy laughed, though the pain burning in her eyes was oddly familiar. I had felt the same every time I looked at Melissa, every time she used my desire for a mom against me. Garrett isn't too bad, but I still wouldn't trust him. I don't trust either of them. I admitted, I don't like being used, and so far, Garrett has done nothing but use me. Dad likes control, complete control." Caddy shifted uneasily, her voice dropping low. "I know you don't know much about this world, but no one can overthrow an Alpha or Luna. The only way they forfeit the position is by dying. If you died, the pack would go to your mates, and then their children. Garrett can try, but I won't let him control me." I shook my head, slinging the duffel bag over my shoulder. "One last thing," Caddy called out as I turned to leave the room. Her eyes burned with unshed emotion, and for once, I wished I could feel the emotions more than just Alec and Cade. I turned at the sound of her voice, noting how it lowered to a hushed whisper. "I know you don't trust me, but when you become Luna, I don't plan on being on your bad side. Use this bit of information wisely. There's a reason you moved to town, and it wasn't a new job opportunity for your mom. Like I said, Garrett likes control." Chapter 56. My mind was reeling with the information Caddy had given me. She hadn't said it outright, but there was no need. Somehow, Garrett had planned for Melissa, Frank, and I, to move here. Anger rushed through me, and I wanted to storm downstairs and demand answers. I stopped myself in time, knowing it would only place the blame on Caddy. I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted Garrett all angry, he would certainly turn me down. I grimaced as I walked downstairs, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. If I could get a read on Garrett's emotions, I might know if he was lying or not. As it stood, the only people's emotions I could sense were Alec and Cade. Both the twins halted their glaring at Garrett to meet my eyes as I walked downstairs. My stomach fluttered as I met their dark, captivating eyes. I couldn't remember why I had left them in the first place, and knew I would never make that mistake again. As I walked into the foyer, someone new stood next to Garrett. He had Garrett's stature and body type, but that was the only similarity between the two. Where Garrett and I had chestnut hair, the man had shaggy hair the color of wheat. His eyes were a deep shade of green, mixed with dark hues of brown and gold. They stood close enough together that I knew they were familiar with one another. I met the man's eyes and watched as he smiled at me, flashing a set of straight teeth. "I apologize for strolling in unannounced." The guy chuckled, ignoring Garrett's irritated look. He walked over to me and held out a large, calloused hand. Alpha Julian, I've heard quite a bit about you, Claire. Have you, now? I asked warily, gripping Alpha Julian's hand in my own. The man had a strange scent. I could tell he was a werewolf, but his scent also had a sharp edge to it. You gave these men quite the chase. Alpha Julian chuckled, and for a moment, his face was lit like the sun. Good to see you back in one piece. Yeah. Well, I learned my lesson. I internally cringed, flashing Alec and Kate an apologetic look. Good thing too. Alpha Julian nodded understandingly. Horrible thing, to lose your mate. Wouldn't wish it on anyone. It was nice meeting you, Claire, but it looks as though your mates are ready to head out. I'm sure we'll meet again. Ready to go, doll? Alec asked, ignoring the sour look on Garrett's face. Kate had a similar look of irritation as he glanced from Garrett to Alpha Julian. Actually, not yet. I shook my head. I knew I was going to regret this, but I had to take a chance. Reading Alec and Kate's emotions had to be the start of my abilities, and I needed to try and use them for answers. I turned to Garrett, seeing the surprise flash in his eyes as I talked to him in an even tone. There's still some things I'd like to ask you. We got off on the wrong foot, and I'm still far from trusting you, but you still have a place in my life. Could we come for dinner sometime this week? Alec and Kate's surprise felt like barbed wire, stinging my skin as it lashed me. Neither one was happy with my words, yet neither one spoke up. I had the sneaking suspicion they were trusting me, and showing me respect by not questioning me in public. I made sure to mention we would be coming to dinner, as I knew Alec and Kate wouldn't let me step foot in this house alone. Garrett's mouth opened, then closed before he finally found the words to say. I would like that very much, Claire. Garrett nodded. Does tomorrow afternoon sound acceptable? Sounds good to me. I nodded, turning to Julian. It was nice meeting you as well, and you're welcome to join us for dinner. If Garrett doesn't mind, that is. While I kept my face blank, I noticed the deeply edged look of irritation on Garrett's face as I invited Alpha Julian to dinner. I wasn't sure how the four of them knew each other, but I was bound to find out if Julian agreed to come to dinner. Garrett, Alec, and Kate's identical expressions confirmed my thoughts. None of them liked one another. This dinner might be a shit show, but I was determined to get some answers. You're more than welcome to stop by, Julian. Garrett gave him a tight nod, one Julian noticed. Awesome. I'll see you tomorrow, Claire. Julian smirked at Garrett and flashed me a quick wink before walking further into the house. I'll see you tomorrow. I called out, giving Garrett a short nod before walking out of the house with a very stiff Alec and Kate. Sweetheart, what was that? Kate asked the second we hopped in the car. I could feel the anger bubbling within him, but his words held no irritation. Trust me, having dinner with Garrett is the last thing I want. I replied. Caddy told me something interesting when I went to grab my stuff. She said Garrett likes control, and that Melissa and I moved here for a reason. I thought that reason was a new job offer, but Caddy made it pretty clear that a new job offer wasn't the reason for our move. You think Garrett brought you here? Alec asked incredulously, shaking his head as he glared daggers at the house. I don't know what to think, but I'm not putting anything past him. I admitted. If I can read both of your emotions, why couldn't that extend to someone else? Wouldn't it make sense that my abilities stem from one specific thing? You would think so. Alec nodded slowly. Is that why you invited yourself to dinner? To try and read Garrett's emotions. Sure is. I smiled sheepishly, there's no guarantee it'll work, but I have to try. You should practice beforehand. Cade frowned, brushing his dark hair from his face. Tomorrow doesn't give you much time to practice, better start today. Sounds like a plan to me. I nodded. Looks like we're going to Garrett's for dinner tomorrow. Alec groaned, sitting back in his seat. Alec flashed me an amused look. You do know we're coming with you, right? I figured as much. I grinned at the two of them. How'd you figure that out, doll? Alec snickered, leaning his chest against the back of my seat. I knew you'd both come, because I'd do the same for both of you. I laughed. The soft looks I received from Alec and Cade told me all of their emotions without the need of my strange ability. The three of us figured the best place to practice would be in town. Cade took us to the park in the center of town, a place I had only ever admired from the short drive it took to reach their house. The park consisted of a large field, with a few benches, flower bushes, and lamp posts. Children ran in the field laughing, some with bubble wands in their hands. Alec, Cade, and I sat on one of the empty benches facing towards the street. I ran my eyes over the countless shops and noted there wasn't a bakery. This town could use a bakery. I smiled, watching a small group of people wandering from store to store. You think so? Alec chuckled. Like the one you worked at? Cade asked, a dark eyebrow raised in my direction. Exactly like that one. I nodded, thinking for a minute before adding, with less pink. I still don't understand how Beth could stand that much pink. Say the word, and we'll have a bakery placed in town. Cade nodded, turning his eyes to the strip of stores that lined the main street through town. My heart fluttered in my chest at the thought of running my own bakery, and at how quick Alec and Cade had offered to make my new dream come true. I had never had someone care about what I wanted, let alone listen to my personal desires. Every minute I spent with the twins did nothing to prepare me for what my future would become. I still couldn't understand how I came about being mated to these two thoughtful, protective men. The conversation shifted from the potential bakery, to how I might use my budding abilities. Neither had any clue where to begin, as I haven't left them with enough time to properly research white wolves. Thinking back on it, I probably should have scheduled the dinner for later in the week. Is there something specific you do to pick up on Alec and I's emotions? Cade asked. No, it kind of just happens. I shrugged, it's almost instantaneous. If you're feeling pissed, I feel at the moment the emotion forms. It might be easier for you to connect to us, seeing as we're your mates. Alec nodded thoughtfully, his unruly hair ruffling in the gentle breeze. You might have to force it to read someone else. Maybe we're the default setting. Cade snickered, and Alec rolled his eyes. Ignoring the twins bickering in the background, I pinpointed a specific person walking from shop to shop. A man around Garrett's age, wearing a dark t-shirt and grease-stained pants. From the looks of it, the guy was a mechanic. I tried to reach out with my senses, to try and will the emotions from him. I was met with nothing. The results were the same each time. No matter how hard I tried to force it, the only emotions I was picking up on, belonged to Alec and Cade. Frustration, lust, fondness, and more lust. Maybe we should take a break. Alec suggested when I pinched the bridge of my nose for the 10th time. A headache was beginning to form, as though I were overexerting myself even though nothing had happened. I let out a long sigh, releasing the pent-up frustration I felt. Not yet. I huffed, I'm going to try something else. Instead of listening to what they had to say, I closed my eyes. Birds chirped, children laughed, and I could even hear the faint whooshing of the wind rushing through the grass. Instead of forcing the emotions from other people, I opened myself up and let them come willingly. At first, nothing happened. Just as I was about to open my eyes, a rush of energy settled over me, followed by hair-raising anger. The anger washed through me like a tidal wave, and I sucked in a raspy breath. It felt like I had inhaled a spoonful of cayenne pepper. The emotion caught me completely off guard as I tore myself from the bench and spun around, facing the source of the blinding emotion. A head of flaming hair was coming in our direction. Tori's face was contorted in both surprise and anger as she stormed our way. Chapter 57. Tori's anger whipped around her like a tornado. Bits of glass scratched and sliced my skin. Just as I reached out and grasped the thrashing emotion, it slipped from my fingers. An invisible wall slammed down between Tori and I, cutting off my connection to her emotions. I took a staggering breath and tried to calm my own nerves before opening myself up again. Instead of forcing it, I let each sensation brush by me, letting each one go. The whirlwind that was Tori's anger resumed, swirling around strands of my hair and in between my fingers. I let the anger wash over me, delving deeper. Underneath the anger was the distinct, sharp sting that reminded me of hurt. I scolded myself for a minute. Of course, she was hurt. I had left without a word, leaving the phone she had gotten me on the bed. Tori had been my first friend in such a long time, and I repaid her by constantly refusing to trust her. Hidden even deeper was an emotion I hadn't anticipated, understanding. While her anger was like a blistering fire, the understanding she felt was like the ocean cool, crisp waves dashing the heat of the flames. She stopped a few feet in front of me, her chest heaving with emotion. I could see each one play out in her eyes, gritting my teeth against the wave of exhaustion that settled in my bones. I noticed how Alec and Cade took a few steps away from the two of us, neither one dared to interrupt what Tori was about to say. Her face was as red as her flaming hair, her mouth opened and closed but words refused to form. "You," she sputtered, her incredulous eyes flashing from me to Alec and Cade. Giving me one last emotion-clouded look, she turned her eyes to the twins. "You brought her back." "She chose to come back," Alec murmured, and I couldn't help the grateful look that came across my face. "We wouldn't ever force her." "So, you chose to come back?" Tori snorted, placing her hands on her hips in her typical fashion. I had seen this look on Tori's face when she scolded one of Grace's friends for bullying me. "That's ironic considering you chose to leave in the first place. Do you have any idea how that made me feel? None of us knew what had happened to you. I thought we were friends, Claire. You could have trusted me." The anger in Tori's voice quickly gave way to hurt, which hid that underlying tone of understanding. From those three emotions, I knew that Tori would forgive me. She would undoubtedly make me grovel and earn her forgiveness, but she understood why I had left. I could feel the twins' unease at the anger in Tori's tone, but neither stepped in. I appreciated them keeping their distance, knowing I needed to fix this myself. If I was supposed to have this great destiny, I couldn't let Alec and Cade jump in to fix all of my problems. I made this mess, and it was time I owned up to it. Tori, Alec, and Cade were the most important people in my life at the moment. I had hurt each one of them, and would willingly pay the price to fix that. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking about who I would hurt, I just needed to leave. I sighed, feeling nothing but guilt as her emotions battered me. Even with the blinding anger she felt, she was still concerned for me. I knew that if I let myself dig deeper into her emotions, I would feel the tiniest shred of happiness. She was glad I had come home, that I found my way and decided to stay with Alec and Cade. I had no idea what this meant for our friendship, but I wasn't willing to give up quite yet. Everything was coming down on me. First Melissa and Frank, then Grace, and then Garrett showed up dropping the biggest bombs of my life. I didn't believe him at first, when he told me what I was. I had no idea that you could actually help me, Tori. I know you didn't, Claire. Tori sighed, letting out a sharp breath. I understand why you left Goddess, I do. Just because I understand, doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Anything could have happened to you out there. You could have been caught by someone other than Alec and Cade. You might think you don't have people who care about you, but you do. I was nearly caught. I admitted, ignoring the wary glances I received from Alec and Cade. I wanted to trust Tori, to rebuild the bridge I had nearly destroyed. Trust wasn't something that came naturally to me, but it was something I was willing to work on. I didn't have any immediate family I could trust, but I knew the family I chose would be much stronger than that of shared blood. I trusted Alec and Cade without even noticing the shift in my emotions, and I wanted to do the same for Tori. If I hadn't shifted for the first time, well, I wouldn't be here now. Alec and Cade found me in time, but I learned my lesson. I let people scare me off instead of trusting the three of you. It's a mistake I won't make again. The happiness radiating from the twins was enough to wipe the sting away that Tori's anger had left behind. I could taste Cade's surprise, as though he was still finding it hard to believe that I had come back. Alec felt the same, random rushes of awe coursed through him when he looked my way. I could feel Tori's anger diminishing, leaving behind a dull throb that spanned my forehead. Even though her anger was beginning to fade, I could still feel her caution. She wanted to trust me, but I knew it wouldn't come easy. I wasn't sure how the twins managed to trust me, but I had a feeling the mate bond was coming into play. At the mention of my almost capture, Tori's face hardened. A fierce surge of curiosity and worry bubbled through her, mixing with the understanding and sliver of happiness she felt. You were almost captured. She sputtered, whipping around to face Alec and Cade. Why wasn't I told about this? Do you have any idea who did it or what they wanted? We have one of them in a cell. Cade raised his hands in surrender. We were planning on questioning him tomorrow, but if you want to take the reins, not helping. I murmured to Cade, flushing at the sly grin that formed on his face. I'm just saying. With that anger, you might get some answers out of the guy. Cade chuckled, making Tori scoff and roll her eyes. Even though Cade managed to take some of the fire out of Tori's eyes, she refused to back down. How Tori managed to stand her ground to not one, but two alphas, was beyond me. Yet, she refused to even flinch as she stared into the eyes of Alec and Cade. Perhaps you should tell her, doll. Alec shrugged, giving me a look that made my legs weak. His look was one of absolute trust, one that told me he and Cade would follow me to the ends of the earth if I asked. Whatever you choose to do, we'll stand by it. Alec's words left me enough room to pick and choose what I wanted to tell Tori. I could easily tell her a couple masked men had tried to kidnap me, but I had learned my lesson by not trusting her. I wanted to mend that bridge, to regain the friend I had nearly lost. Keeping more secrets from her would only prove I didn't trust her. If I was going to do this, I needed to be all in. It's a long story. One I'd rather not tell in public, but if you're interested I wouldn't mind explaining everything. I told her, hoping she could feel the sincerity of my words, and the weight of what I was willing to tell her. Tori seemed to grasp my understanding as a determined look crossed her face, the thick guard she kept around herself lowering. All right. Tori exhaled, and I could visibly see her shoulders relaxing. Come to my house tomorrow, around noon. Dad and Mom are visiting my aunt, so they won't be around to hover. If I don't see you tomorrow, I'll hunt you down, Claire. Not even Alec and Cade will stop me. Also, this is still yours. Tori placed something cold in my hands, and I looked down at the cell phone she had given me a couple months ago. The battery was full, and I wondered why she had kept it for me. I could see the reluctance in her eyes as she walked away, resuming what she had planned for the day. As Cade wrapped his arms around my waist, and Alec placed a lingering kiss to my forehead, I realized something. Alec, Cade, and Tori were the first people to care about me in such a long time, and I knew that if I allowed it, the three of them would become the family I never had. Chapter 58. I found myself standing in front of Tori's house the next day, my stomach a bundle of nerves. Even though it seemed like she had forgiven me, I knew I caused a rift to form between us. I knew my reasons for leaving were justifiable, but I couldn't erase the pain I caused in my absence. Just as I had the right to leave, she had the right to be upset. Crawling into bed with Alec and Cade last night, they both promised to support me regardless of what I told Tori. After asking my permission, Alec and Cade entrusted the information to their betas, asking if they would dig up any information about white wolves. That's where Alec and Cade were today, helping their betas learn more about me and what I might be capable of. We all knew it was risky to tell Tori the full truth, but I wanted to trust her. I wanted to go that extra mile for her. As I waited for Tori to come to the door, each passing second made the knot in my stomach grow. I gritted my teeth together and remained in place, resisting the cowardly urge to flee. I wouldn't run, not anymore. I reminded myself that this world wasn't new, it had been here the entire time, hidden right under my nose. Despite my cowardly feelings, I knew I belonged here. I could feel how my heart sang in this pack, how comfortable I felt in this town and around these people. Someday, I reminded myself, these people would become my own. Tori opened the front door with a wry smile, surprise shining in her eyes. Instead of searching for her emotions, I let them wash over me. Surprise, suspicion, and a sweet note of happiness. It was becoming easier for me, feeling the emotions of others, now that I learned not to force my ability. Come on in. Tori murmured, holding the door open for me. Want something to drink? Mom made some sweet tea. Sure. I nodded, following her into the kitchen. I stood in comfortable silence as Tori padded over to the fridge, pulling out a large pitcher of tea. Her fire KSSCD hair was tied up in a bun on her head, a few orange strands fanned out over her forehead. The two of us walked up to her bedroom, and I plopped down on the edge of her bed where I had once sat before. All right, spill. Tori pursed her lips. What happened when you left? You said you were almost taken. Who? Why? I took a long gulp of the sweet tea she had given me, letting it wash down my throat as I thought of the words to say. Now that I was here, the words lodged themselves in my throat. Tori's wariness was like a knife slashing at my insides. Burning guilt filled my veins, but I knew I deserved the reaction. I'll just start when I left. I made it to this small town, and actually got a job at a local bakery. I actually loved working there. One night, I was walking back to the house I rented, and 3 men attacked me. They smelled different. Alec and Cade said they were werewolves like us. I think Thalia, my wolf, knew Alec and Cade were nearby. So, we shifted. Hurt like hell too, not that I stuck around long enough for anyone to explain that part. I grimaced, readying myself for Tori's inevitable reaction. I managed to get away from the men, and I ran, but not before they saw I was a white wolf. I ended up at this woman's house. She helped me realize a few things, that I was wrong for leaving. She was also a white wolf, the last one until I came along. Alec and Cade showed up a little later. They followed my scent until they found me. They told the truth, you know, about not forcing me to come back. They asked me what I wanted, and I decided to stay with them. I shifted uncomfortably as Tori collapsed into silence. I traced my fingers along the edges of the glass, feeling the condensation dampen my fingertips. Unable to stand the silence for much longer, I let Tori's emotions wash over me. The wariness had vanished, as had the initial anger at my leaving. Unfiltered surprise washed over me, tart and crisp like a lemon. You're a white wolf. Tori nodded, though I felt she was saying the words to herself. Are you sure? I'm pretty sure. I giggled, a hand over my mouth as I read the acceptance in her eyes. And you're trusting me with this? I mean, I'm assuming Alec and Cade told you what a white wolf is, and you know what could happen if this got out to anyone else. Tori murmured, fixing me with an intense stare. They told me, but I trust you. I nodded, meeting her eyes unflinchingly. I think they trust you too. They told me to do what I thought was right, so I did. You know I wouldn't tell anyone, right? Tori replied, and I couldn't help the smile that had formed on my face. The more time I spent in this pack, the more I realized the mistake I had made. While I couldn't change the past, I think running away gave me perspective on some things. I now trusted Alec and Cade, despite the rocky start we all had. I also trusted Tori, and knew we would be friends for a long time. I know you wouldn't. I smiled softly, I wouldn't have told you if I thought otherwise. So, you're really back? Tori exhaled, an ear-splitting grin had formed on her face. I was going to ask, but I think it's kind of obvious. You know Alec and Cade are your mates. Yeah, I already figured that part out. I chuckled, hesitating as a small pang of emotion danced through me. I missed them, I realized. Even though they were with their betas at the moment, and would pick me up later, I missed the two of them. It seemed no matter how much time I spent with them, it was never enough. Each minute in their presence only increased what I felt for them, emotions I had never felt for anyone. Did you let them mark you? Tori spoke lowly, her white eyes darting around my face and neck. I mean, I'm not sure how it would work, having two mates and all. You might have two marks, who knows? Wait, what? I frowned, mark me. They never mentioned it, did they? Tori scoffed. A few fiery strands of hair slipped from her bun as she shook her head. They probably didn't want to force you into anything, especially after all that's happened. Care to explain? I quipped, an eyebrow raised. I'm only explaining this to you cause the look on your face worries me. Tori laughed, I'd hate for you to chew out Alec and Cade so quickly after accepting them. On second thought, that might be fun to watch. Tori. I groaned, tell me what it is. Your wolf hasn't mentioned it. She asked. Thalia can be quite unhelpful when she wants to be. I snickered. You came back to the pack, and accepted them as our mates. Thalia huffed, rolling her eyes at me. The last thing I wanted to do was chase you off again. Goddess knows you don't listen. Well, basically Alec and Cade would bite you. Right here. Tori pointed to the spot where my shoulder and neck meet. A strange sensation danced through me, sending little tingles down to the tips of my toes. I don't know how it would work with two mates, but that's the gist of it. Mom said it hurts a lot, but it's worth it in the end. The wound heals and leaves a really pretty mark, totally unique to the couple. It basically tells unmated wolves to back off. Would I have to mark them? I asked, sounding unsure. How would I do that? I'm not sure how I shifted in the first place, and I can't imagine biting Alec and Kate in my wolf form. My mouth would fit over their entire neck. You don't have to be in wolf form to do it. Tori shook her head. I watched in silence as Tori grinned at me. My jaw dropped when her teeth elongated, her canines growing into that of a wolf. It looked funny, those large teeth in her small mouth. Her lengthened canines shrunk back into place, her teeth returning to normal. How do I do that? I asked, somewhat excitedly. While I knew nothing about werewolf customs, I could tell the whole marking thing was a big deal. While Thalia certainly encouraged me to mark Alec and Cade, I found myself hesitating. It was another step in our strange relationship. I couldn't deny how appealing it sounded, to have everyone know that Alec and Cade were mine, and vice versa. Still, I wanted to be sure before I jumped into anything. I wasn't even sure if we were in an official relationship, though I had a feeling being mates surpassed a normal boyfriend-girlfriend agreement. Then comes the fun part. Tori snickered. Usually after marking one another, you complete the mating process. That part should be interesting for you, having 2 mates and all. Completing the mating process. I frowned, suspicious as thick amusement washed through Tori. I have a strange feeling it's not going to be pleasant. Not going to be pleasant, huh? Tori snorted, oh, it'll be pleasant all right. I'm not understanding. I sighed. Have you never? Oh, I understand now. Tori nodded to herself, smirking as an irritated look fell on my face. Completing the mating process solidifies the bond between mates. First, you mark each other, then you sleep together. Sleep together, I repeated, swallowing roughly as I realized what she meant. Chapter 59. I wasn't sure why I was surprised. I had done things with Alec and Cade before, things that set my skin aflame and sent my blood racing through my veins. Tori was right, it was more than pleasant being with Alec and Cade. I knew the next step would come eventually, but I never let myself think on it too much. I couldn't help but wonder how that would work, how I might be with the 2 of them. I can practically see the gears turning in your head. Tori cackled, it's not rocket science, Claire. There's never been a she-wolf with 2 mates before, but I'd say take them at the same time. At the same time? I sputtered, choking on the oxygen that rippled and swirled in my lungs. I trusted Alec and Cade, and knew they'd never push me into anything, but I couldn't imagine having them both at the same time. I knew how it worked, but also knew stuff like that came with quite a bit of discomfort. You have more than one hole. Tori smirked, and I felt my skin heat unbearably. All right, that's enough of that. I shook my head, gulping down the rest of my tea. Let's not talk about my holes. Oh, Claire. Tori laughed, you have much to learn. So, you've had S*X before? I asked warily, somewhat flustered and embarrassed. I have. I dated a human guy for a few years, but he moved away. Tori shrugged as though it were nothing new. Werewolves can mate with humans sometimes. Not often, but it happens. He wasn't my mate, but that didn't stop me from sleeping with him. Saving yourself for your mates is an outdated notion anyway. Do you see the male werewolves saving themselves? No, you don't. So why should I? I let Tori finish her mini rant, but found myself agreeing with her. It was another unspoken custom I was completely unfamiliar with, but I found myself enjoying Tori's strong-willed personality. I couldn't help but wonder who her mate was, and hoped he had a boatload of patience. I spent the next few hours with Tori, only leaving when I had no other choice. Our dinner with Garrett was in a few hours, and I needed time to shower and change before making my appearance. I knew it would be a stressful afternoon, especially if Garrett's wife was close by. I hadn't a clue what Julian's purpose for being there was, but I figured I'd ask Alec and Cade soon enough. As Tori and I sat on her front porch waiting for Alec and Cade, I found myself thinking over what we had talked about. I wasn't sure I was ready to sleep with Alec and Cade, but I continued thinking about the mark that would one day sit on my skin. Would it be 2 marks? Would they be the same? I couldn't help but wonder how much it would hurt. Tori's mom said it hurt a lot, so I could only imagine what receiving 2 marks would feel like. I wasn't sure I was looking forward to the pain, but if it meant keeping Alec and Cade by my side, I would endure it for them. I had just worked up the courage to ask them about it when their car pulled into the driveway. My courage fizzled like a damp match, sputtering out as I locked eyes with Cade. Their emotions slammed into me like a battering ram, making me dizzy as I tore myself from the swing on Tori's porch. I could tell they both had missed me, I could feel it in every blistering emotion that exuded from their large forms. It took all the willpower I could muster not to rush into their arms. Instead of barreling down the steps, I settled for a brisk jog. As my arms wrapped around Cade's waist, I could feel his surprise and awe at my touch. Once I got my fill of Cade's thick and delectable scent, I moved on to Alec. Their muscular arms wrapped around my torso, holding me against them as they each planted a kiss to the top of my head. "Missed us, sweetheart?" Cade smirked, brushing a hand through his already messy hair. "I did," I admitted with a smile. "Don't bother lying. I can tell you both missed me just as much. It seems we can't hide anything from you." Alec chuckled, a sly grin on his handsome face. Alec hopped back into the car, driving the extremely short distance to their house and pulled into the driveway. Tori lived only a house away from Alec and Cade, making our friendship even more convenient. I walked alongside Cade, unable to resist slipping my hand in his own. His large hand engulfed mine, but somehow, they both fit perfectly. "We have just enough time to shower and change." Cade looked down on me, his eyes softening as they met my own. "Though, we could save more time if we showered together." Alec smirked, hopping out of the car. Cade's face mirrored Alec's, their devious expressions caused a blush to form on my cheeks. My mind instantly went back to my conversation with Tori, only making my blush deepen. "Looks like our mate is having some interesting thoughts," Cade murmured, brushing a knuckle across my heated skin. "Somehow, I don't think that would save time." I cleared my throat. I added extra sweetness to my voice as I cooed at the two of them. "You two could shower together, that would save us plenty of time. Plus, I wouldn't mind the show." Alec and Cade shared a blank look before turning back to me. Judging from their gentle emotions, they weren't completely against my suggestion. If anything, the thought of me watching them shower, it was somewhat appealing. My inexperience with all things made me somewhat timid, but the twins brought out a new side of me. Despite the nervousness I felt around them, I also felt comfortable enough to be myself. "She's so cruel, brother." Alec sighed, shaking his head. He met his brother's eyes, and a sly grin formed on his full lips. "I suppose we could give her a free show, just this once. Next time, it'll be your turn." Cade leaned down, murmuring in my ear with his rough voice. I couldn't hold back the shiver that worked its way down my spine, nor the blush that reappeared at the sound of Cade's sultry laugh. That was how I found myself just a few short minutes later. I sat on one of those plush stools in their large bathroom, and I was sure my blush had permanently embedded itself onto my face. I hadn't thought the two of them were serious about giving me a show, but it seemed they were both determined to prove me wrong. The shower in the bathroom was huge, set with multiple shower heads that protruded from the walls. The ceiling itself was one big shower head, raining water down onto the tiled floor. I couldn't help but notice the shower had no doors. There were 2 marble steps that led into the shower, to where the water could easily drain without flooding the bathroom. The shower was easily large enough for the 3 of us, but I couldn't work up the courage to join them. "Enjoy the show, doll," Alec murmured, his hand grazing underneath my chin. An amused smile twitched onto his lips, making him look even more deviously handsome. Even though my face held its blush, I couldn't force myself to turn away. Alec stripped the long-sleeve shirt from his torso, his movements slow and confident. I watched in silence, practically drooling, as his muscles rippled with the movement. Cade followed after, his build a little larger than his brother's, but equally drool-worthy. I couldn't begin to fathom how I found myself here, watching my 2 mates strip bare in front of my very eyes. Normally, a girl was lucky to have one male in her romantic life that looked like this, yet I had 2. I swallowed thickly as Cade's pants fell to the ground, tossed in the hamper that sat across the bathroom. Warm steam filled the bathroom from the shower, warming my body even more. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't tear my eyes away as the 2 of them stood bare in front of me. While Alec and Cade were identical twins, there were some parts of them that were different from one another. Cade's build was a little larger than his brother's, his shoulders just a little broader. Alec's abs were more defined than his brother's, his muscles ending in harsh lines and angles. A few scars were etched onto their torso and backs, but they only added to the allure that clung to the 2 of them. They both stood in silence, eyes dark and blown wide with lust as my gaze traveled even lower. I sucked in a harsh breath as I caught sight of the length between their legs. They were both hard, the steel between their legs hung proudly. Cade was thicker than his brother, but Alec's was just an inch or 2 longer. I shifted on the stool, my thighs pressed tightly together as I forced my eyes to travel even lower. Large, muscular thighs led down to chiseled calf muscles. The 2 of them were works of art, identical yet different in every way. Porcelain skin chiseled from stone, mine to taste, to devour and savor. "Are you sure you don't want to join us, sweetheart?" Cade murmured, his eyes practically burning into my skin, as though he could see past the layer of clothes that clung to my body. "We would miss dinner." I managed to choke out, my gaze slowly trailing up their bodies. "We would definitely miss dinner." Their lust and desire washed over me like a boiling wave. Heat flooded my veins, sizzling as it hit my skin. They both wanted me more than I could express in words. Even with the overwhelming need they were feeling, they both remained rooted in place. They'd go at my pace, Alec had once told me. My willpower would crumble, would break, and burn until there was nothing left. I would give them everything, anything they wanted if they continued to look at me like that, like there was nothing in this world more potent than me. My breaths came out in short pants, and with all the willpower in my body, I forced my eyes to return to their faces. "We would miss dinner, but you wouldn't regret it." Alec smirked, but the expression didn't reach his consuming gaze. "No, I don't think I would regret it." I managed to reply, "I'll get in once you 2 are finished." Alec and Cade heeded my words, and both stepped into the shower after flashing me another heated look. While they were facing away from me, I watched as the water beaded and ran down the muscles spanning their backs. The water twisted and turned, caught by the grooves of their muscles. I knew they could feel my eyes on them, running down their shoulders and lingering on their firm bottoms. They even had nice SS, I thought to myself. I expected some flaw, some imperfection. No person, human or werewolf, could be this perfect. Even their physical flaws added to the allure, to the intense attractiveness that radiated from every pore, every rippling muscle and spattering of hair. I let out a long sigh as the two of them finished and left the bathroom, giving me privacy as I showered. The two of them remained hard nearly the entire shower. At least 30 times I had contemplated skipping the dinner altogether, marking and mating just as Tori and I talked about. I reminded myself over and over again, that we needed to be at this dinner. I needed the information, needed to see if Garrett was telling the truth. The water rained down on me, soothing my tense muscles. It wasn't a show they had given me. I didn't think it would be this hard not to touch them, not to give in to my instincts and urges. As the water poured down on me, my soaked hair clinging to my shoulders and back, I slipped a hand between my legs and let out a quiet sigh. Chapter 60. No matter how I muffled the sighs that left my L.P.S., release refused to come. It was like my body knew what it wanted, just as my mind and heart did. It refused to function for anyone else, refused to react unless it was under the gentle touches of the twins. Understanding my efforts were hopeless, I finished my shower and dried off. I had brought a change of clothes into the bathroom, and slipped on a thigh-length dress. The sleeves were long but thin, enough to combat the gentle chill that started up this afternoon. I blow-dried my hair while the twins waited outside, undoubtedly getting ready themselves. As I stepped out into the bedroom, I was bombarded by the thick scent of Alec and Cade. As I turned to grab a pair of shoes, Alec stood in my way. We were only inches apart, but I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His musky scent swirled with the slight tang of tea tree from his body wash. The scent was entirely new, but equally to die for. My breathing hitched as Alec trailed a finger down my reddened face, lingering around my collarbones. "Were you able to finish?" Alec murmured, toying with the hem of my dress. His warm fingers danced along my bare thigh, coaxing a thick shiver that ran down my spine. "No," I swallowed, my voice coming out a few octaves higher. Alec continued toying with the hem of my dress, letting his fingertips dance closer and closer to the softness between my legs. Just as the pad of his finger grazed over my underwear, he pulled away. His eyes were dark, and the fabric of his pants was tight around the middle. He gripped my face with one of his large hands, tilting my head up so that I looked him in the eye. "Poor little mate. Even now, your body craves us," Alec murmured, his breath fanned across my ear. "Cade and I will help you later." His L.P.S. trailed along my jaw, igniting that aching fire low in my gut. I pressed my thighs tightly together, ignoring the scent of my arousal as it flooded the room. "Where is Cade?" I asked, my eyes darting around the room as I fumbled for a reason to change the subject. Alec and Cade separate were a constant temptation, a constant chip in my willpower. Together they were irresistible. Having that much male attention focused solely on yourself, a girl could get used to that. The way they seemed to devour my reactions, inhaling the blissful noises that leave my L.P.S. under their touch. Being with them fully, it would be all-consuming. "Your little whimpers got him too worked up." Alec chuckled lowly in my ear, he needed a few minutes to himself. "You're welcome to lend him a hand, though I might get jealous." It took me a handful of minutes to calm myself down, and another 10 minutes to still the intimate thoughts fumbling through my head. When Cade finally returned, he flashed me a wide smirk as my face heated and my eyes darted downward. When we finally managed to leave the house, Alec and Cade gave me a rundown of who Julian was. He had been the leader of a small band of rogues, but quickly grew in power as his pack number increased. Eventually, he became a full-blown alpha. It was rare to create your own pack, as werewolves would always fight for power, but Julian had managed to do just that. As Julian's numbers continued to grow, he sought out a home for him and his pack. He claimed a small sliver of territory above Garrett's pack. As Julian's pack grew, he began to need more territory to fit his people. Alec and Cade's territory were vast, and encompassed both Julian and Garrett's territory. Alpha Julian had asked multiple times that Alec and Cade relinquish some of their territory to Julian and his growing pack, that they seek out more territory to the north to replace what they had lost. Alec and Cade refused, as thousands of people would then need to leave their homes and move hundreds of miles away. While I couldn't blame Alec and Cade for doing what was best for their people, I knew there had to be some solution to the problem. The sun was beginning to set as we pulled into Garrett's driveway. The sky was bright with color. Navy blue, indigo, orange and pink flashed across the sky. The moon was slightly visible, a thin sliver in the distance. Yellow light shined from inside Garrett's house, and I braced myself for the inevitable meeting with his wife. Caddy answered the door as we knocked, giving me a nervous smile as we stepped inside. I was wary when she locked eyes with Alec and Cade. She looked at them the way most people did. Her eyes grew wide at their build, and shock undoubtedly flashed over her face. I'm apologizing ahead of time for anything my mom says. Caddy grimaced, not that it makes a difference. I could feel her sincerity fill the room, washing over me like a cold wave. Caddy wasn't a bad person, I knew that now. She had said some rude words out of jealousy and spite, but that didn't define her as a person. I appreciate it. I told her honestly. Are you going to tell Dad what I told you? Caddy frowned, lowering her voice. She gave Alec and Cade a nervous glance, but otherwise turned her attention towards me. I mean, I can't blame you if you did, but Dad won't be happy. I won't tell him you said anything. I assured her. I could feel her gratefulness, sweet like candy but tinged with something bitter. Guilt flooded her veins, bitter and somewhat chilling. She was hiding something from me. It was like a whisper in my head, warning me she wasn't being completely truthful. Why would she feel guilty if she had told me everything she knew? I pushed the feeling aside and followed Caddy into the large dining room. The smaller table had been replaced with a larger one. Seated at the head was Garrett, off to his left was his wife and on his right was Julian. Garrett wore a crisp suit as he often did, this one a dark shade of slate grey. Veronica looked impeccable as always. If it weren't for the deeply edged sneer on her face, she would have been runway beautiful. Her golden hair was the same shade as Katie's, and fell to her back in glossy waves. Her cherry lipstick was bright yet tasteful, and matched the sleek dress she wore. She didn't look a day over 25, but the sneer added a few years onto that. While Veronica flashed me a weighted look, she said nothing. Veronica didn't need to use her words to get her point across. Overwhelming disdain and something close to hatred spewed from her pores, wafting over me like a poisonous fog. I nearly flinched at the impact. I had never felt negative emotions before through my newly acquired gift. I had felt Tori's anger, but it was a far cry from the hate that Veronica was throwing my way. It's good to see you. Garrett gave me one of those charming business smiles and sat down. While his smile was one he flashed to many, making him look charismatic and laid back, I could tell he was being sincere. He was truly happy that we had come for dinner. Now that I could feel the emotions of others, I wasn't sure how I felt about Garrett. He wasn't perfect, and he was far from ever becoming a parental figure in my life, but his emotions spoke louder than his actions and words. For instance, I could feel his nervousness. For whatever reason, he was worried about tonight. The brief tang of guilt radiated through him, similar to Katie's, though I couldn't determine the source. "Thanks for having us," I managed to say through gritted teeth. I sat at the far end of the table, directly across from Garrett. Alec and Kate sat on opposite sides of me. Their positive emotions fought against Veronica's. Their affection, happiness, and awe battled the hate that washed over me in waves. "This isn't awkward or anything." Julian coughed, covering his laugh with a long swig of alcohol. Katie hid her smile behind her glass of wine, while Veronica threw one of her signature glares at Julian. It seemed I wasn't the only one Veronica hated. The only people she seemed to truly care about was her daughter and mate. Lucy and a handful of men brought out our dinner. Pristine china covered by a silver dome. It was unbearably fancy, and something I wasn't used to. Lucy hadn't changed in the time I had been gone. The lines etched into her face made her look friendly and approachable. As she spotted me at the table, a kind smile formed on her face. She was glad to see me, I could tell from the subtle emotions radiating from her. Her wheat-colored hair was pulled into a bun as she padded over to me. "Steak or salad?" she asked, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Steak," I replied, rolling my eyes at Alec and Kate's identical grins. They both looked deviously handsome tonight. Both wore black button-down shirts and black slacks. The only difference between them was their hair. Alec's hair was all one length, grazing his ears messily. Kate's hair was shorter around the base, but longer on top. Each time they turned their eyes away from me, which wasn't often, I couldn't help but gawk at the muscles protruding from their clothes. A quiet snort sounded from across the table as I eyed the steak on my plate hungrily. I caught Veronica's cold eyes, and grimaced as she shook her head disdainfully. Her mouth opened and for a second, I thought she was actually going to say something. She caught Alec's eye and seemed to think better of what she wanted to say. Her mouth clicked shut, and her disdainful gaze turned to Julian. "So, what made you come back?" Julian blurted out, giving Garrett a shrug when he scolded him. "What? I hardly know her. Consider me curious. I made a mistake leaving. When Garrett told me what I was, I kind of freaked out." I frowned. Some of the tension left my body as I felt Alec's fingertips graze my kneecap from under the table. He picked the worst way to break the news though. "I take full responsibility for that." Garrett grunted, and I swore I could make out the lightest shade of pink tingeing his cheeks. I could feel his embarrassment and sheepishness at his mistake. "In all honesty, I assumed Melissa would have told you something. I lived with my grandma for a while. I never really saw Melissa until she died." I shrugged. "Your grandma was a fine woman." Garrett nodded, and I could tell he was speaking the truth. "Miserable to be around once you pissed her off though." "That she was." I nodded in full agreement. "You lived with your grandma for a while then?" Julian chimed in, his voice casual and almost bored. While Julian's voice sounded bored, his emotions were anything but. He was interested, and his curiosity was almost overwhelming. I wasn't sure why he was so interested in my life, but I figured it couldn't hurt. My grandma had died a long time ago, there was nothing to be used against me by telling them this. Since I was born. I shrugged. When she died, I moved in with Melissa. "How did that go for you? Living with your mother?" Julian asked, and I couldn't ignore the way Garrett grimaced. More guilt swirled around him. I was beginning to question my gift, Since I met Garrett, I thought the only thing he cared about was my future role in the pack. Judging from his strange emotions, he felt some semblance of responsibility for me. He felt guilty for leaving, guilty because I lived ignorant and miserable with Melissa. I shoved the conflicting feelings deep down and turned to face Julian. Melissa isn't my mother, never was. I stayed out of their way and lived my life. I replied, I took care of myself. Veronica scoffed for the third time, but it seemed she couldn't keep her mouth shut. A child who shows no respect for her parents has no right ruling an entire pack. Veronica snapped, her voice cold. How can you show respect to those you rule, to those willing to lay down their lives for you if you can't even respect your own family? Veronica. Garrett's voice was full of hostility, though I could tell he was restraining himself. Like it or not, Veronica was his mate. No matter how rude she was, he'd always have a soft spot for her. While I was having a hard time accepting that fact, I was glad to have Alec and Cade by my side. Alec and Cade had no qualms about defending me. In fact, Alec let out a low growl in her direction. Both Alec and Cade were glaring daggers at Veronica. Enough. It's fine. I told Alec and Cade, giving them a grateful smile. I turned my attention to Veronica, and absolutely refused to balk under her intense glare. My family is Alec and Cade. I respect them just as they respect me. Melissa and Frank were never my family. Respect isn't blindly given, Veronica. It's fought for and earned. Which is why you will never, ever have my respect. Julian let out a low whistle, snickering as Veronica's face turned an unflattering shade of red. Caddy seemed shocked, her eyes flickering between me and her mother. Even Cade chuckled lowly, taking a long drink before sharing a smirk with his brother. She's definitely part of the family. Julian chuckled. If it weren't for my strange ability to feel emotions, I would have never noticed the meaning in what Julian had said. As Julian finished speaking, a barrage of emotions flooded the room. Garrett was feeling panic and shock, fear and anger. Julian was feeling amusement and irritation. Even Veronica felt panicked, her eyes burning into Julian unflinchingly. Caddy, that familiar sting of bitter guilt came back. Alec and Cade seemed not to notice the meaning, but I did. Part of the family, I repeated slowly, savoring the emotions that flooded through each of them. My eyes flickered from Garrett to Julian, noting the differences and similarities. Garrett and Julian seemed to be having a silent argument, one that Garrett was currently losing. As their quiet battle finished, Julian fixed me with a heavy stare. Yes, Claire. Part of the family. Julian nodded, a smile twitching at the corners of his P.S. It's nice to finally meet my niece. Chapter 61. Niece. Alex scoffed. We've been dealing with you for weeks now. You didn't think we needed to know this kind of information? At the time? No, you didn't. Julian shrugged, ignoring the identical looks of rage on the twins' faces. What about you? Cade snapped, his eyes narrowing on Garrett. You didn't think your daughter had a right to know? Let's not blame my half-brother. Julian smirked at Garrett, who scowled in response. We've been estranged for quite some time. The poor man can hardly stand to be in the same room as me. Regardless, we've had a common goal for quite some time. Garrett's scowl turned outright deadly. He bared his teeth at Julian and spoke in a low voice. She doesn't need to know right now. She already has enough on her plate without you adding to it. Before I developed my gift, I would have assumed Garrett was being his typical selfish, conniving self. While I didn't appreciate the lies, I could feel the emotions behind Garrett's words. He was genuinely concerned for me. There was still no way I'd trust the man, but feeling his emotions showed me a side of him I hadn't known existed. She's accepted what she is. The sooner she knows, the faster she can prepare. Julian snapped at Garrett, who then rolled his eyes. It seemed the topic of conversation wasn't anything new for the two of them. Judging by the impatience in Julian's tone, they had talked about this countless times. I knew Julian had won when Garrett clenched his jaw shut, the muscle in his cheek ticking angrily. I'm not sure how familiar you are with our customs, but there's a few things we need to go over. As you know, you will be taking over Garrett's pack. Your mates will take the position of Alpha, while you take over as Luna. The two packs will merge into one larger pack. Julian grunted, and I could feel his distaste. For whatever reason, he didn't want Garrett's pack to merge with Alec and Cade's. Judging from the similar emotion radiating from Garrett, he felt the same. I couldn't entirely blame them. Garrett's pack would essentially be ran by Alec and Cade, and there was no love lost between the three of them. Julian cleared his throat and continued, "Our customs are ancient, and they are always followed. As I am unable to have children, custom states my pack will go to my closest descendant. Not only will you be responsible for Garrett's pack, but you will also inherit my own." The room collapsed into silence, and all eyes settled on my face. Alec and Cade stared at me with equal looks of surprise, their plush L.P.S. parted as they gazed in my direction. Their emotions were what kept me centered. They were the buffer between me and Veronica's crippling anger. Their awe and affection steadied me, gave me room to think about what Julian had said. The rage that spewed from Veronica was like a thick, hot blanket. Her face turned the same cherry red as her L.P.S. Her red manicured nails reminded me of blood, and I found myself inching away as her slender fingers curled into a fist. "Not only will the bastard child inherit your pack, but two others," Veronica hissed, practically spewing acid with every syllable that left her L.P.S. She turned her venomous attention to Garrett, who winced under her gaze. "Because of your stupidity, your daughter will inherit nothing. She will be nothing. Our only hope for her is that her mate is an alpha with a pack of his own. I hope you're happy with what you've done, Garrett." Caddy seemed to shrink down in her seat. While I felt her disappointment, there was no animosity towards me. Her embarrassment was the strongest emotion, and I knew it was directed at her irate mother. "Enough!" Cade snapped, his rough voice echoed throughout the dining room. His eyes were lit with an onyx flame as he stared at Veronica with a clenched jaw. I could see the slight tremble in his form, and winced under the onslaught of his anger. Veronica's anger was like a sharp whip, lashing out at anyone nearby. Cade's anger was like ice, pinpointed solely on Veronica. Her anger was that of petty jealousy, Cade's was that of cold-blooded murder. "This might be your home, but this is our pack," Cade snarled, slamming his fists down on the table. The silverware and plates jumped, settling back on the table with a rattle. "Speak negatively of our mate again, and you will not leave this pack alive." Veronica's head whipped around to Cade, her face paling as she took in his rigid stance. Her eyes darted over to Alec, who watched her with the same emotionless stare. "Don't bother looking around for help, you'll find none," Alec snapped. I could feel both of their anger, similar yet completely different. Cade was like an ice storm, while Alec reminded me of a crackling fire. Both intense and crippling, but completely at odds with one another. Behind the anger, I could feel the fierce protectiveness they felt for me. The emotion was like an adrenaline rush. From the moment they arrived at Sage's house, I knew the two of them wanted and accepted me. They had never forced me to come home, or forced me to accept what I was. They always gave me a choice, no matter how it might hurt them. Up until now, I hadn't truly known what I meant to the twins. I had grown on them, just as they had grown on me. We'd never be complete without one another, I realized. Not after this. The realization changed something inside of me. That small, whispering voice of doubt faded. They'd never leave me, they'd never fail me. They'd always put me first, and I'd do the same for them. I wanted this, I wanted to tie myself to them in every way possible. Rather than saying something she'd regret, she bowed her head and left the room. Her anger followed her like a thick cloud, though the uncomfortable sensation still remained in the dining room. Caddy stood from the table, giving her dad a weak smile before turning her eyes on me. "Sorry," she mouthed. I gave her a gentle nod and watched as she left the room, trailing after her distraught mother. I still wasn't sure how I felt about Caddy. I knew it was impossible for someone to suddenly change overnight. Judging from the emotions I picked up, it seemed like beneath it all Caddy wasn't a horrible person. I honestly couldn't blame her for turning out the way she did. If I had a mom like that, who knows how I would have turned out. I believe we should continue this conversation another time. Julian shifted in his seat, casting a wry glance towards Garrett. Give Veronica time to deal with this. She might never come around, but she'll learn to live with what is. I am not looking to you for advice. Garrett snapped, but his face was plagued with exhaustion. I could feel the guilt and pain that echoed within him, and tried not to let it wound me. It hurt him to hurt his mate. I knew the feeling and knew I'd react similarly if I had ever hurt Alec and Cade the way he hurt Veronica. Garrett and I might never have a normal relationship, but he was making an effort. He had abandoned me, and I'd never forget it, but no person was purely good or evil. Regardless, forgiveness was a long way away. Garrett stood from the table, flattening out his suit jacket before clearing his throat. Thank you for coming tonight. It was nice having you here, Claire. We'll speak again soon. The three of us left shortly after, the food sitting heavily in my stomach. I had a feeling I was missing something important, that Alec and Cade had connected the dots where I hadn't. The car ride home was coated in thick silence. Just as we pulled into the driveway, I couldn't handle it anymore. Are they serious? I exhaled. We're going to be in charge of 2 other packs. If you're sure about this, sure about us, the packs will merge into our own. We'll absorb the territory and people. Alec frowned, glancing at his brother. They both radiated shock, but also nervousness. It was the harsh anxiety that set my teeth on edge. Why are you both so worried? I asked, my eyes darting between the two of them. Once you turn 18, the packs will officially be transferred over to you. Cade grimaced. There's a sort of hierarchy with the packs in the United States. Our seniority is ranked by how large our pack is, and how much territory we own. Larger packs become targets. If Alec and I were to be killed by another alpha, they have every right to claim our pack. What's your point? I asked, wincing against the sickening feeling in my stomach. Once our pack merges with Garrett and Julian's, we'll be the largest pack in the country. Alec replied, his eyes burning with worry. It'll be like painting a target on our backs. Keeping your wolf a secret will now be harder than ever. Chapter 62. As we pulled into the driveway, I realized something startling. I was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. I knew there would always be danger, that people would try and use me as a weapon, but none of it seemed to matter. All this time, I had thought Alec and Cade were too good to be true. There was no chance that I had been given not one, but 2 soulmates to forever cherish and support me. Some small part of me thought that whatever was blossoming between us wouldn't last. While I wasn't quite ready to go throwing around the L word yet, there was something else I wanted. Alec and Kate's parents were already asleep as we entered the house. I was relieved Alec and Kate couldn't feel my emotions the way I could feel theirs. They would sense the turmoil and anxiety from a mile away. I tried to keep my fingers from fidgeting, but I couldn't help the slight tremble that worked its way through my hands. While I still lacked details, Tori had told me about the werewolf's mating process. It was funny in a way. Everything I had done was with Alec and Kate, yet they still made me horrendously nervous in new and exciting ways. As we walked down the quiet halls, towards the bedroom we shared, I realized simply having S*X would never be enough. I wanted to tie myself to them in every way possible, to leave a mark on their soul that couldn't be mistaken as anything other than my own. I wanted every gentle touch, every smoldering soul-shattering look. It all seemed too good to be true, to have a destined mate born to love you. Perhaps it was a small repayment for the death and destruction that seemed to plague a werewolf's life. That in the midst of the chaos, a small sliver of happiness would surface. So that no matter how long one had to live, they could do so with happiness in their hearts. I was slowly learning to face things head-on, and this was another obstacle for me to face. I wouldn't let my fear keep me from being with them, from fully accepting them as my own. "Can you unzip me?" I asked Kate, blushing as Alec's lingering stare followed me into the bedroom. "Of course, sweetheart," Kate murmured, his eyes softening as I brushed my hair to the side and turned. His rough fingers trailed along my shoulders, pressing harder as a shiver worked its way down my spine. The zipper was cold against my bare back, making a quiet noise as he pulled it down to my bottom. Kate's fingers dipped inside the back of the dress, grazing my ribcage and stomach. I could hear his heavy breaths behind me, and could feel the hammering of his heart. It wasn't lust I was feeling from him, but a gentle sort of awe. Each brush over my soft skin left him feeling weightless and happy. Even with the carefree emotions, I knew he wanted more. Alec and Kate's desire were like an endless pit, the darkness constantly looming, ready to take over and devour me at first chance. Instead of giving in to the overwhelming anxiety that tried to surround me, I leaned back into Kate's touch. I let his emotions wash over me, wiping away the lingering trepidation I felt. I was safe here, safer than I had ever been before. These two, giant werewolves would defend me until their last breath. It was a freeing feeling, one I had been waiting my entire life to experience. It felt like my soul was soaring, only to be met by Alec and Kate's. One of Kate's hands drifted higher, toying with the band of my thin bra. His other hand grazed lower, tracing lazy circles along my hip bones. My legs clenched together on their own accord, my body giving into the overwhelming sensation of Kate's rough fingers on my soft skin. A deep, husky laughter caressed my ear and traveled down the length of my neck. I could hear Kate inhale deeply, his nose buried in my hair. "After your little performance earlier, tell me why I shouldn't just take you now." His voice dropped a couple octaves, hitting me in every place his fingers wouldn't. A building pressure formed low in my stomach, and a budding moisture between my legs. "Do it, Kate," I murmured huskily. "Take me." Before I could blink, I was tossed backwards onto the bed. "Are you teasing me, sweetheart?" Kate growled. "Tell me what you want, Claire. Tell me or I might take it all. I want all of you. You're perfect, so perfect. Are you sure about this, Claire?" He murmured quietly, his hooded eyes lifting to meet mine for just a brief second. "I'm sure I've never done this before, but I'm sure." I whimpered, nodding my head a little too enthusiastically. Cade stilled against me. We've been the first to taste you? To kiss you? Yes. I nodded, my voice soft and heart-thundering. I was horribly inexperienced, unused to the attention and touch of men. For a moment, I regretted it all. The inexperience left me feeling self-conscious and somewhat silly. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. Good. Cade's deep voice thundered, his eyes burning with pure satisfaction. Chapter 63. When he stopped me. Keep them up there, sweetheart. Cade murmured, his lips turning up in a purely male smirk. I'm going to take my time with you, and you're going to deal with it. I'll have Alec hold you down if I must. Cade's head tipped towards the other side of the room, but his eyes remained on me. My head snapped over in that direction, my face blistering with heat as I locked eyes with Alec. He was sitting on one of the armchairs in the room, nestled against the wall. He watched us with dark eyes. He leaned back in the chair. He had been watching us the entire time, I realized. I wasn't sure which turned me on more, Cade's mouth traveling my body or the fact that his twin brother was so clearly aroused from watching us. Please, Alec. I whimpered, unable to keep the whine from my voice. My breaths were growing heavy, just as the pressure in between my legs grew. Cade knew how much I needed this, how much I needed them both. He was toying with me. All of my self-consciousness flew out the window, replaced by blissful desperation. Don't beg my brother, he won't help you. Cade murmured, he's going to sit there and watch as I make you scream, Claire. Only after I taste you, will he get a turn. Remember, keep your hands to yourself. He murmured, his eyes glinting with a predatory light. How does she taste, brother? Alec murmured from across the room. Sweet, like honeydew. Oh, don't stop. The words left my mouth in desperation, the incredible pressure had reached its limit. Please, don't stop. I watched in stunned silence as Cade's tongue darted out to taste myself on his skin. Naughty mate. Cade tsked, shaking his head at me. I thought I told you to keep your hands to yourself. I want to feel you. I whimpered. You'll feel me all right, sweetheart. But you won't come until I say. Cade murmured, moving his way up my body. I couldn't get enough of him, enough of his touch, scent, and taste. The only thing that could make this better was Alec. I needed him too, then it would all be complete. In the midst of my pleasure-filled, I turned my eyes to Alec. He was breathing heavily as he watching me with hooded eyes. Having 4 hands on me was something I never thought I'd experience. Not a single part of my body went untouched, not a single inch of skin hadn't been tasted. My body was drowning in the sensations, unable to make sense of it all. I was drunk on the pleasure of their touches. Their emotions mixed in with my own, until I couldn't tell what belonged to who. Awe, happiness, and something even stronger twisted in their emotions. The emotion wasn't fully developed, but there were sweet hints of it here and there. It was the start of an emotion I hadn't experienced before, one that filled me with unspeakable joy. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.